Imagine a beautiful teacher who locks her classroom door every lunchtime. Not to teach, but to devour her students' meals. One by one, she would open the lunchboxes, devouring the contents with a hunger that defied her slender frame. The children grew thinner. Their uniforms began to hang. Their eyes lost their sparkle, as they cry every day. 20 mothers it happened to. 20 children came home starving, because one teacher was eating everything. She thought she was untouchable. How would you feel if your lunch disappeared every day? This is the story of Anastasia, and it's about to take a wild turn. Hello friends, welcome to Oyam's African Tales. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of hidden potentials, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel.
The radiant smile of Anastasia, a teacher in Primary 3 Orange, was a mask as flawless as her beauty. No one would ever suspect the monstrous secret she harbored. The dark ritual that unfolded daily within the pastel-painted walls of her classroom. Anastasia, with her silken hair and captivating eyes, was a predator in plain sight, preying on the most innocent of souls, her own students. Every lunchtime, as soon as the lunch bell rang, a hush fell over the classroom. The children, their small hands clutching brightly colored lunchboxes, would dutifully line up. Anastasia, with a sweet, patronizing tone that belied her sinister intent, would inform them that she needed to eat the germs that had infested their delicious meals. Wide-eyed and trusting, the naive children, believing their beautiful teacher was protecting them, would hand over their food. Then, the true horror would begin. Anastasia would lock the classroom door, the click of the latch a signal of her undisputed reign. One by one, she would open the lunchboxes, devouring the contents with a hunger that defied her slender frame. Miss Anastasia soon grew bold. She began placing orders the day before, telling each child exactly what she craved tomorrow. Didi's mother, Mrs. Ifeoma, made the most fragrant jollof rice in the whole of town. Smoky, perfectly spiced, with pieces of goat meat that fell off the bone. Every time Didi brought a flask of that scarlet jollof, Miss Anastasia's eyes glittered. She would eat 2 full portions and burp quietly behind her hand. Ngozi's mother, Mama Ngozi, was the queen of yam porridge. She cooked the yam until it melted into itself, added smoked fish, palm oil, and just a touch of locust beans. Kayamika's mother ran a small bakery from home and sent her daughter to school with meat pies that were the stuff of legend, golden pastry so flaky it shattered at the touch, filled with spiced minced meat, potatoes, and carrots. Miss Anastasia would eat 3 in a row and still lick her fingers for the crumbs. Zainab's mother made noodles that danced with vegetables, bright carrots, green peas, sweet corn, and tiny cubes of chicken, all tossed in a shiny sauce that smelled of curry and thyme. She finished it with a handful of fresh spring onions on top. Zainab's noodles disappeared fastest. Lydia's mother was a professional chef who had trained in Paris. Lydia brought continental dishes: chicken in creamy mushroom sauce, buttery mashed potatoes, or pasta carbonara with real bacon. Miss Anastasia saved Lydia's lunchbox for last, eating it slowly like dessert. Anastasia ate to her fill, savoring every last morsel, before leaving mere crumbs for the children to eat, her hunger satisfied at their expense. Her demands grew bolder, more specific. "Tell your mummy you want jollof rice tomorrow, and Didi," she'd cook. "And Lydia, perhaps your mother could make that delicious seafood pasta again?" The children, eager to please their beloved teacher, would relay these requests to their parents, unwittingly becoming conduits for Anastasia's escalating gluttony. The children grew thinner. Their uniforms began to hang. Their eyes lost their sparkle. Didi would bite her lip until it bled, remembering how her mother sang while stirring the jollof the night before. Uzoma's eyes would fill with tears the moment Miss Anastasia's shadow fell over her desk, She could still smell the plantain porridge on her own uniform, yet her belly was empty. Miriam, usually the loudest singer in class, became quiet and watchful, hugging herself as if holding her hunger inside. Little Ngozi started wetting the bed at night. She told no one, but she dreamed over and over of her mother's yam porridge disappearing into Miss Anastasia's red-painted mouth. Some children cried silently every single day. Kayamika's tears fell straight into her lap, while Miss Anastasia ate the meat pies her mother had woken up at 4 a.m. to bake. Zainab stopped talking altogether for 2 weeks. She just stared at her empty noodle bowl when it was returned, the spring onions wilted and sad. Lydia, whose mother sent love notes tucked under the chicken, began hiding the notes in her socks, so at least something from Mummy stayed with her. They were dying in small, quiet ways. Their ribs started to show. Their skin lost its shine. They moved slower on the playground, too weak to run. At night they lay awake feeling their stomachs twist and growl, terrified of the next day. Fear was worse than the hunger. Fear of being alone, fear of the locked door, fear of that beautiful smile that lied and lied and lied. Uzoma began having nightmares in which Miss Anastasia grew taller and taller until she blocked out the sun, opening a mouth full of sharp white teeth to swallow every plate in the world. She woke up screaming, then lay still, terrified that the scream would travel all the way to school and Miss Anastasia would punish her tomorrow. The charade continued until one day, one of her students fainted in the school premises. She had not eaten all day, her stomach aching with emptiness, because Anastasia had eaten all of her food without leaving any for her. Anastasia glared at the little girl, her voice a low, menacing whisper. "If you dare tell anyone that I eat your food, I'll make sure no one in this class ever talks or plays with you again. You'll be alone. Do you understand me?" The poor girl, frightened and trembling, kept silent, her eyes welling with tears. Her name was Uzoma, a shy little girl whose mother's plantain porridge could wake the dead, was celebrated for her culinary prowess, particularly her exquisite fried rice. It was a symphony of flavors and textures, with fluffy rice grains stir-fried with an array of colorful vegetables, tender shredded chicken, and succulent prawns, each bite a testament to Mrs. Ngazika's love and skill. Uzoma also adored her mother's perfectly cooked plantain porridge, sweet and savory, or the wholesome yam porridge, often served with a side of fish stew. But today, Mrs. Ngazika had packed Uzoma's favorite fried rice, a generous portion that Anastasia had devoured entirely, leaving Uzoma weak with hunger. That evening, when her mother came to pick her up from school, Uzoma could barely stand. Her usually bright eyes were dull, and her movements were sluggish. The school nurse revealed to Mrs. Ngazika that her daughter fainted from hunger. Anastasia, trying to cover up her tracks, jumped in and began to speak, attempting to deflect blame. Uzoma has been so naughty today. She refused to eat her food and even threw it on the floor. Mrs. Ngazika, mortified, apologized profusely to Anastasia. But as she took Uzoma home, a knot of unease tightened in her stomach. Uzoma, usually a hearty eater, pushed away the dinner plate. When pressed about the incident at school, her daughter stammered through a disjointed story about accidentally pouring her food. Mrs. Ngazika looked into Uzoma's eyes and saw not childish clumsiness, but a profound, unshakable fear. It was the kind of fear that shadowed a child's soul, hinting at a secret too painful, too dangerous to reveal. Later, as Mrs. Ngazika tucked Uzoma into bed, her daughter made an unusual request. "Mummy," Uzoma whispered, "could I have jollof rice for lunch tomorrow?" Mrs. Ngazika's brow furrowed. Uzoma adored fried rice. She rarely asked for jollof. This inexplicable preference, coupled with the lingering fear in Uzoma's eyes, gnawed at Mrs. Ngazika all night. Sleep offered no respite. Mrs. Ngazika tossed and turned, replaying the day's events. Uzoma's pallor, her fainting spell, the uncharacteristic refusal to eat, the terrified stammer, and finally, the strange demand for jollof rice. Her maternal instincts screamed that something was terribly wrong. There was a hidden darkness, a secret burden Uzoma was carrying, and it stemmed from that classroom. The next morning, a steely resolve hardened Mrs. Ngazika's expression. She would get to the bottom of this. As Uzoma prepared for school, Mrs. Ngazika carefully packed her lunchbox. This time, however, she didn't reveal its contents. Inside the main compartment, she placed a meal Uzoma notoriously disliked, rice and beans. But as a cunning countermeasure, she also tucked a generous assortment of Uzoma's favorite snacks, biscuits, fruit, and a juice box, deep within the hidden pockets of her daughter's school bag, enough to sustain her through the entire day. She kissed Uzoma goodbye, a silent promise in her heart. Today, the truth would be unveiled. The morning air at Sunny Meadow Elementary hummed with the usual clamor of hurried footsteps and excited chatter. Uzoma, a quiet girl with large, observant eyes, blended seamlessly into the throng of her classmates. But as the lunch bell's cheerful chime echoed through the halls, a familiar twist of dread coiled in Uzoma's stomach. Anastasia, their teacher, stood by her desk, a vision of effortless grace with a smile that could melt glaciers. "Children, bring your food," she announced, her voice like honey laced with something sharp. "Remember, I must check for gems first." One by one, the children approached Anastasia's table, their lunchboxes clutched like precious treasures. Anastasia's inspection was a performance. She'd open each box, a theatrical sigh escaping her lips as she feigned concern. Now me," she'd coo, inspecting a particularly colorful bento box. "This one has small germs, so I'll clean it for you." With a swift, practiced motion, she'd scoop spoonfuls directly from the children's lunches into her mouth, her expression a mask of feigned culinary delight. "Ah, May," she'd exclaim, her voice dripping with false praise. "Your mummy is a wonderful cook. Don't worry, I'll handle the germs for you too." When it was Uzoma's turn, Anastasia's eyes lit up with an almost predatory eagerness as she snatched Uzoma's humble flask. "Ah, Uzoma," she purred, her smile widening. "I hope it's jollof rice today." The moment the lid was off, however, revealing the simple aroma of rice and beans, Anastasia's pleasant facade crumbled. Her brow furrowed into a thunderous scowl. She glared at Uzoma, her eyes like chips of ice. "Tell your mother to always give you jollof fries for lunch," she spat, the words sharp enough to wound. Uzoma could only nod, her heart sinking as she watched Anastasia greedily devour her own child's meager meal. Hours later, when Uzoma finally returned home, her mother, Mrs. Ngazika, noticed something profoundly unusual. Uzoma, who detested rice and beans with a ferocity that made her cry at the mere thought of it, had finished everything. Mrs. Ngazika stared at the empty flask, a cold knot of unease tightening in her chest. It was an impossible feat. Uzoma would sooner endure gnawing hunger than touch that particular dish. The flask felt unnervingly light in her hand, not a single grain of rice or bean clinging to its sides. Uzoma was already engrossed in her dolls in the corner, her small body a picture of innocence. But her mother's voice, soft yet carrying an undeniable weight, sliced through the room. "Uzoma, come here, my dear." The little girl froze, every muscle tensing. Slowly, reluctantly, she turned and shuffled towards her mother, her gaze fixed on the floor. "Did you really eat all your food today?" Mrs. Ngazika asked, her voice calm but her eyes searching Uzoma's face. Uzoma's lips trembled. "Yes, Mommy," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper, her eyes darting everywhere but her mother's. "Are you sure?" Mrs. Ngazika pressed gently, her suspicion growing into a chilling certainty. "You finished rice and beans? The same rice and beans you cried over last week? The same one that makes you gag?" Tears, hot and sudden, welled in Uzoma's eyes and spilled down her cheeks. At that moment, Mrs. Ngazika knew. Something was terribly, terribly wrong. She told Uzoma she was going to speak to her teacher, and the child erupted into a torrent of desperate sobs, pleading with her mother not to talk to Anastasia. Uzoma's fear was palpable, a suffocating presence in the room. Mrs. Ngazika tried to coax words out of her daughter, but Uzoma remained stubbornly, fearfully silent. That night, Mrs. Ngazika sat with the husband after explaining what she observed at the dining table. long after Uzoma had fallen into a fitful sleep. Every word, every flicker of fear in her daughter's eyes, replayed in her mind. The puzzle pieces, however disturbing, were beginning to form a clear, agonizing picture. She made a silent vow. She would get to the bottom of this. The next morning, Mrs. Ngazika packed a lunchbox filled with jollof rice, Anastasia's favorite, a choice that felt both like a strategy and a sacrifice. A determined, yet anxious, smile played on her lips as she closed the lunch bag, then escorted her daughter to school. Upon arriving at Sunny Meadow Elementary, Mrs. Ngazika walked Uzoma to her classroom. Anastasia greeted them with that same disarming smile, a sheepish glint in her eyes as she welcomed the children. Mrs. Ngazika watched Anastasia's gaze, how it darted, almost imperceptibly, towards the array of lunchboxes. It was then that Anastasia, with a flourish, announced, "Today, I will help arrange the lunchboxes on the shelves myself." To the casual observer, it seemed like an act of helpfulness, a teacher meticulously organizing her classroom. But Mrs. Ngazika saw the truth. Anastasia was meticulously arranging them according to her own hidden agenda. A prickle of unease, sharp and undeniable, told Mrs. Ngazika that her suspicions were not just valid, but urgent. She excused herself and made her way directly to the headmistress's office, her heart thrumming with a mixture of apprehension and resolve. "Good morning, Ma," Mrs. Ngazika began, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I'm so sorry to disturb you. It's about my daughter, Uzoma, and her class teacher, Miss Anastasia." The headmistress, a woman of stern demeanor and sharp intellect, looked up, a faint frown creasing her brow. "Miss Anastasia? What about her?" Mrs. Ngazika hesitated, then spoke plainly. "I may be mistaken, ma'am, but I have reason to believe that she has been taking my daughter's food." The headmistress's eyebrows shot up. "Taking her food? Are you certain, Mrs. Ngazika?" "Yes, ma'am," Mrs. Ngazika said softly, her gaze unwavering. "Uzoma comes home hungry and frightened every day. And yesterday, I tested something. I packed a meal my daughter despises, rice and beans. When she got home, she claimed to have eaten everything. But I know my child, ma'am. She cannot even bear the smell of it. Someone else is eating her food, and I strongly suspect. I suspect it's her teacher." The headmistress leaned back, her expression thoughtful, a slight edge of skepticism in her voice. "Mrs. Ngazika, I understand your concern, but Miss Anastasia is one of our most esteemed teachers. She has been with us for 5 years and has never received a single complaint. She is gentle, disciplined, and adored by both staff and parents. Are you absolutely sure of what you're suggesting?" "I am not accusing her blindly, ma'am," Mrs. Ngazika replied, her tone firm. "But something is profoundly wrong. The children are afraid of her, ma'am. Especially my daughter." The headmistress sighed, a deep, weary sound. "All right, Mrs. Ngazika. I will speak with Miss Anastasia privately. But for the sake of maintaining peace within the school, I will not mention your name or your child's. I will bring up the issue as a general concern regarding lunch arrangements." A wave of relief, though tinged with lingering anxiety, washed over Mrs. Ngazika. "Thank you, ma'am," she said, the words a whispered prayer. The afternoon sun, usually a warm embrace, felt like a spotlight, too bright and exposing, as Anastasia was summoned to the headmistress's office. She smoothed her skirt, a nervous habit, and offered a polite smile that felt brittle. "Good afternoon, Ma. You sent for me." The headmistress, Mrs. Serafina, a woman whose gaze could pin a butterfly to a board, motioned for Anastasia to sit. As Anastasia sank into the plush chair, a knot of unease began to tighten in her stomach. Mrs. Serafina steepled her fingers, her voice low and measured. "Anastasia, I've received a rather unusual report today." Anastasia's smile faltered. "Oh, it concerns the lunch periods in your class," Mrs. Serafina continued, her eyes steady. "Several parents have expressed concern. There are claims that pupils' meals are, well, being tampered with. That perhaps someone, possibly a teacher, has been consuming their food." The accusation hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Anastasia's eyes widened, a gasp escaping her lips. eating their food. Ma, that's utterly ridiculous. Her voice, despite her attempt at composure, trembled. I would never. I treat those children like my own. I help them with their flasks. I clean up after them. I would never dream of such a thing. Mrs. Serafina nodded slowly, her expression unreadable as she studied Anastasia's reaction. I know, Anastasia. You've always been an exemplary teacher, and I relayed that to the concerned parents as well. However, she paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. I felt it was best to hear directly from you. A forced smile, shaky but present, returned to Anastasia's lips. Thank you, Ma. You did the right thing. She forced a laugh, which sounded hollow even to her own ears. Children can be so imaginative, can't they? Perhaps they've misunderstood something simple. Indeed, Mrs. Serafina agreed, though her eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. However, I urge you to be vigilant, Anastasia. Parents can be fiercely protective when it comes to their children's welfare. Ensure that everything in your classroom is handled with the utmost propriety. I understand perfectly, Ma, Anastasia replied, her hand instinctively going to her chest, as if to still a racing heart. I would never allow such a thing to tarnish my classroom. Leaving the office, the polished hallway felt like a gauntlet. Anastasia's jaw was clenched so tightly her teeth ached. Her palms were slick with sweat, and her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Who would accuse me? Who would tell their parents? She seethed silently. She pushed open the classroom door, the familiar scent of disinfectant and crayons doing little to soothe her frayed nerves. Her gaze raked over the faces of her young charges, a predatory gleam lurking beneath her forced composure. Amar's eyes, usually so bold, darted away the instant her gaze met his. A smirk, sharp and venomous, twisted Anastasia's lips. So, she began, her voice dangerously soft, one of you has been whispering tales to your parents, has he? She paused, letting the implication hang. You will all see what happens from this day forward. She sank into her chair, the anger a hot, bitter tide rising within her. The atmosphere in the classroom shifted palpably. Anastasia, once warm and nurturing, became a creature of ice and suspicion. She locked the classroom door earlier than usual, the heavy click echoing the finality of her resolve. Her warnings, once gentle reminders, morphed into veiled threats, whispered with chilling clarity. Remember what happens if you cross me. Remember who controls your lunch. Then, a new pupil arrived, a quiet, observant girl named Funmi, clutching a bright purple lunchbox. Funmi was a whirlwind of vibrant curiosity, her eyes wide with wonder, and her appetite as boundless as her spirit. Her lunchbox overflowed with culinary treasures, golden meat pies, perfectly baked pastries, and an array of colorful snacks that made the other children's mouths water. The first time Anastasia saw Funmi's lunch, a flicker of something primal, greed, ignited in her eyes. Ah, Funmi, she purred, her voice dripping with false sweetness, extending a hand. Let me help you check for any mischievous germs in your food. Funmi, her small face a picture of apprehension, clutched her lunchbox tighter. My daddy said I shouldn't give my food to anybody, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Anastasia's smile tightened, the predatory glint returning. Oh, so, you don't want your teacher to help you? You don't trust me to keep your food safe. The other children, sensing the shift, held their breath. Terrified by the intensity in Anastasia's gaze, Funmi's small hand trembled as she surrendered the precious lunchbox. With a swift, decisive movement, Anastasia locked the classroom door. She sat behind her desk, a triumphant smile on her face, and proceeded to devour the meat pies and snacks, the rich aroma filling the room. The other children watched, their stomachs rumbling in a chorus of silent agony, as Anastasia ate her fill, leaving only a scattering of crumbs that were barely enough to sustain a hungry ant. For Anastasia, it was a feast, a moment of stolen satisfaction, a perverse joy in wielding absolute power. Hours later, a sickening wave of pain washed over Anastasia. Back in her own home, her stomach contorted with a ferocity she had never experienced. She rushed to the toilet, spending the entire night in a writhing agony, her desperate cries echoing through the silent house. By morning, she stumbled into school, weak, pale, and hollow-eyed. Yet the hunger, a gnawing, insatiable beast, had not been quenched. Her greed, it seemed, was a force that defied even severe physical retribution. She began her usual ritual, consuming the children's lunches, her eyes scanning for the next prize. She reached Funmi's desk, but the little girl's gaze, usually clouded with fear, was now clear and resolute. "Auntie," Funmi said, her voice surprisingly steady, her eyes locked on Anastasia's. "My daddy said I should not share. And if you take my food, I will tell my daddy." Anastasia froze, the words hitting her like a physical blow. She had underestimated the child, had underestimated the power of a father's warning and a child's loyalty. She felt a prickle of fear, a chilling realization of the trap she had set for herself. Her authority, so carefully constructed, was unraveling. Infuriated by Funmi's defiance, Anastasia's resolve hardened into something cruel. "You," she spat, her voice devoid of its earlier sweetness, "will go to the back of the class." She then turned to the other children, her eyes blazing. "And none of you will speak to her. None of you will play with her. Funmi has decided not to be part of our class today." The punishment was swift and brutal. Funmi sat alone, a solitary island in a sea of children, her small shoulders hunched, her eyes filling with unshed tears. The other children, terrified of becoming the next target, averted their gazes, their silence a heavy blanket suffocating the once vibrant classroom. Even during art class, when crayons were passed and laughter usually erupted, a thick, oppressive silence descended. The children huddled together, their fear a palpable thing, a new layer of dread added to their daily existence, all because one little girl dared to protect what was hers. The next morning, sunlight, unwelcome and sharp, sliced through the classroom's dusty blinds. Anastasia, her hands planted firmly on her hips, surveyed her expectant charges. "All right, children," she boomed, the sound echoing in the hushed room. "Bring your lunch forward." Funmi, her small frame trembling, was the first to surge forward. Her eyes, wide and pleading, latched onto Anastasia's. "Please, Miss Anastasia," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Tell them to talk to me. I won't tell Daddy I didn't get to share again. Please." Anastasia offered a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes as she accepted Funmi's carefully prepared lunch. The meal, however, was short-lived. Mere moments after the last bite, a guttural rumble, like distant thunder, began to churn within Anastasia's stomach. The sound grew, intensifying, and soon an agonizing cramp seized her. She spent hours afterwards locked in the meager school toilet, the flimsy door offering no solace from the internal tempest. Sweat beaded on her forehead, stinging her eyes as she clutched her belly, crying out in pain. Each heave of her stomach sent fresh waves of agony through her. In that dark, cramped space, with the smell of antiseptic and her own distress thick in the air, Anastasia felt a chilling premonition, a sense that her life was ebbing away. Desperate, she pleaded with a silent God, promising a solemn vow: save her, and she would never again covet a child's food. The pain was unlike anything she had ever endured, a raw, visceral torment that seemed to drain the very life force from her. Somehow, she managed to endure the remainder of the school day, a ghost of her former self, the pain a constant, searing companion. Upon returning home, she swallowed a cocktail of potent medications, hoping to quell the internal rebellion. The following morning, however, the insidious pull of her greed proved stronger than her vow. The moment Anastasia stepped into the school, the tantalizing aromas wafting from the children's lunch boxes ignited her appetite like a rekindled fire. It was a curse, a gnawing hunger that overshadowed her recent suffering. "Children," she croaked, her voice unnaturally weak. "Bring your food. I must check for germs." The children, weary and resigned, shuffled forward. They had endured this ritual countless times, always ending with Anastasia's insatiable appetite devouring everything, leaving them with mere crumbs. When it was Funmi's turn, Anastasia snatched the small, neatly packed lunch with a surprising force. The lid sprang open, releasing a delightful aroma that made Anastasia's eyes gleam. She dove in, eating with a desperate greed, barely tasting the food. Funmi sat across from her, her small hands clenched, a silent, burning anger radiating from her gaze. There was something in the intensity of Funmi's stare, a strange, unsettling intensity, that pricked at Anastasia's conscience, a flicker of unease she quickly suppressed. Just as Anastasia was shoveling another mouthful into her mouth, a sudden, violent wave of dizziness washed over her. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white, gasping for air as sweat, cold and clammy, poured down her face. The children watched, their initial frustration morphing into a shared terror. "Auntie, are you okay?" little Ndidi whispered, her voice trembling. Anastasia forced a weak, unconvincing smile, her hands shaking uncontrollably. I'm fine, children," she rasped, the words barely audible. "Just a headache." Her eyes fluttered, the room tilting precariously, and with a soft groan, she slumped forward, her body collapsing onto the table unconscious. A collective scream of sheer terror erupted from the children. The classroom door, inexplicably locked, prevented immediate access. The headmistress, alerted by the cacophony, burst through the corridor and, finding the door bolted, ordered it broken down. They stormed into the classroom to find a scene of chaos. Children sobbing and shrieking, pandemonium reigning, and Anastasia lying utterly still in her chair, her face ashen, her breathing shallow and ragged. "Call an ambulance," the headmistress shrieked, her voice laced with panic. Within minutes, the wail of sirens pierced the quiet school grounds, and Anastasia, still and unresponsive, was rushed away into the sterile embrace of the hospital.
This story isn't just about a teacher who misused her power. It's about the silent battles children fight when they are too afraid to speak. It reminds us how fear can trap a voice, how hunger can hide behind a smile, and how even the smallest child can carry a weight far too heavy for their tiny shoulders. But it also shows the power of one parent who listened, one child who dared to stand firm, and the moment when truth finally refuses to stay hidden. Now I want to hear from you. What part of this story moved you the most? And what lesson do you think every parent, teacher, or guardian should take from this? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your words might help someone notice the silent cries they've been ignoring. Hello, champions. I hope you enjoyed our stories. Please hit the like button, leave a comment below, and subscribe to our channel to help us grow.